My guest today is Sara Drake. Sara allegedly died on her sixth birthday in a car crash in the mountains of West Virginia. While she remembered everything from the moment of the driver losing control of the car to her experience when the car stopped rolling down the mountain, and from the moment she was hovering over her body on the way to the hospital. Sara remembered nothing of the time, approximately 30 to 45 minutes in between those two moments in time. All she remembered feeling was extreme anger at being sent back again and knowing not to talk about the experience with anyone. Sara, thank you so much for joining me today. I am honored and blessed to have you as my guest.
Well, thank you for having me. I feel honored to be here. It always surprises me that people want to hear my story.
Why would that surprise you? Your story is so interesting, it's so magnificent, and it's so beautiful. The whole world wants to hear your story.
Possibly because to me it was just my life. It
Yeah.
didn't seem special. I mean, I have done research in not a whole depth because I've been busy living life. But I have done research into NDE, which ultimately led me to ions literally just a few years ago. um, I know that most NDEs are from the perspective of adults. And I was a child, and I was a child that did not have a lot of religious indoctrination. But I did have a lot of analytical indoctrination in my house. We were all intellectuals. So for me, it was like, okay, are these experiences that people are sharing as adults colored by their belief system? Which now, with all the research into the brain and blah, 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 we know, yeah, there's no way to share any experience without it being colored by the window by which we define our physical experience. But anyway, so to me, it was just always what happened. And the car crash, my sixth birthday was the summer of 62. And you didn't talk about stuff like this. But I was aware of knowing many things and that other people didn't know, even at the age of 6, because of an NDE that I allegedly had when my mother was pregnant with me. I didn't remember that one till I was in my 40s. But this one, um, we were in a car. It was for my birthday. We had someone living with us who was a college student, and she came from a family who lived in the mountains, and they were not super wealthy, and she was on a teaching scholarship, and people in the community would provide room and board for people on this scholarship. So she lived with us, and in exchange, she'd babysit, and she became like family. And she was taking myself and my younger brother, who was 2.5, to visit her parents who lived up in the mountainous areas. We lived in the valley in West Virginia. And to keep us busy, she was studying to be a teacher. To keep us busy, she had us looking for cows along the way. I'm 6, my brother's 2.5, and I'm highly competitive. So I'm like, oh, there's a cow, there's a cow, there's a cow, there's a cow. And as an adult looking back, I can tell he was getting very frustrated because I'd see them first. Well, hello, I'm 6, he's 2.5. It's just different capability levels, right? Finally, he finds one before I do. And he got so excited, he goes, see cow, see cow. Unfortunately, it was right in front of the driver's eyes. She turned the wheel to the left and we rolled down the mountain. Now, this was the first car, it was my grandfather's car, I found out decades later, and there were no seat belts. We didn't have to wear seat belts in those days, and it was the first car that had power steering. She grew up on a farm with no power steering, so it was a major left turn going down the mountains. Now, the windows were open because it was a pretty summer day, and they were both, we think they fell through the windows as the car turned. Now, this is discussion when I was an adult talking with people who were there. Um, and both of them were on the mountainside while I was in the car and it went all the way down. Now, that was told to me. My perspective was shock that my brother could find a cow before I did. And then the next thing I know, I feel like I'm looking up at the bottom of the front seat and I'm confused. Why am I under the front seat? Now, I was told later, years later, when I was an adult, there wasn't enough room for a body to go under that front seat, not even an infant. But my perspective was I'm looking at the bottom of the front seat, trying to figure out what's going on. I did not feel pain. I don't remember feeling anything physical. It just emotionally and intellectually, mentally, I was confused because that didn't make sense. And then everything went black. I remember nothing until I'm at the top of the hill, hovering above a car. Now, how I could see through the ceiling of that car, I guess, is a physics question related to this because they're just atoms, right? Um, but I'm hovering over the car, again, still very confused. And I'm looking at the driver, and it's a very tall, skinny man from my perspective. And I'm like, who's that man in the driver's seat? Why isn't Virginia in the driver's seat? She was the person driving our car. Why is, and then I'm like, wait a minute, whose car is this? And then I see Virginia in the passenger seat, and I'm like, why is she in the passenger seat? And I look in the back seat because it's kind of like I'm moving from the backs of the seats of the front seats kind of towards the back of the back seat. And I see this woman holding my body, and my body's crying. And I'm like, and who's that woman? Why is she holding me? And why am I crying? And the next thing I know, and it really felt like a slam, I'm in the body crying. And I have no memory of anything other than those things. And I've always remembered those experiences that I just shared. Um, Next thing I knew, I'm in the hospital because I'm kind of in and out of it. And I had a broken leg. I had to get stitches. And my parents drove however far away it was that they had to drive, a couple hours. Her parents came down from their farm, and which I loved because her dad did magic tricks and would pull things like quarters out of my ears, which I thought was so cool. And then give me the quarter. That was even better. But I do remember sitting there, and I knew I had to pretend that I was happy, but I was very, very, very angry. And I remember clearly thinking, I am never coming back here because I have to. I'm only coming back if I want to, and then only to help people. That I did not know at the time was a vow. We are held to our vows, even when we're 6 years old. Um, from that point, I just knew things. I had, I'm told, a wisdom beyond my years. But I was also, I mean, we had letters from my nursery school teachers saying how sorry they were to see me go because of how I was so compassionate in the classroom at the age of 3, 4, and 5. So I think that compassion is because of the first NDE, which I'll get to in a minute or two. But the second one, I kind of closed down um, because I was told not to tell anyone. Now, my understanding of the early 60s is if I had talked to people, they would have thought I was crazy. So that was very good advice that was given to me. But it made it challenging to understand. I hesitate to use the word gifts. Um, this knowledge that I've had from this awareness is something we all have access to. It's not like I'm super special. It's just that for whatever reason, those curtains were drawn back from my window. Um, but little tidbits like 1968, my oldest brother had come home from college with a full facial hair and long hair thing, very popular in the 68, late 60s. My grandfather refused to see him until he shaved and cut his hair because that was his generation. He was born in the late 1800s. And my dad took me to my grandfather's office with him when he and my grandfather started arguing over my grandfather seeing my brother. And I think it was during lunch. So I'm sitting in the office eating my lunch, right? And when there was a momentary silence between the two of them, I just popped up and I was 12. And I said, "So is he a different person when he has hair like that?" And they both just kind of looked at me. That was the end of, and I did that intentionally. I didn't understand why I was asking it, but some part of me knew that was the question to ask. And my understanding is that was the end of the argument. My grandfather did see my brother. He didn't have to shave and cut his hair, is my memory. I don't know if that's an accurate memory because I was 12 and I didn't pay attention to those things. I've always seen energies. I've always experienced them as vibrational frequencies, sort of like the notes on a piano. You have, what is it, 72? Let's see, 8 octaves, white keys, 64, some around 70 white keys, and I think it's been a long time since I've played a piano. But it's the same 12 notes repeated, but at different vibrational frequencies. So we have our low, slow frequencies and our high, faster frequencies. Well, that's to me is existence. That's existence. Um, we all vibrate at different frequencies based on where our conscious awareness expresses, where our health, physical health, our mental health expresses. All of these vibrations are energy. And for whatever reason, I've been gifted with the ability, without having to study and work for it. Um, and I just want to say, I don't think we have to study and work for it. I just think it's like any muscle. The more you exercise it, the stronger it gets, right? So this is a lot of what my NDE, I think, led me to do is to look at energies and study this from I was meditating before I even knew the word meditation. I was doing power naps before that phrase was coined. I just I could make, because school. I could make a thermometer. I could make myself have a fever without having to rub the thermometer and hold it up to the light, right? I don't know how to do that now, but I knew it as a kid. And all of this is just manipulation of energy. And that's what we're all doing anyway, is manipulating our energy. So my question is, What kind of results do you want to see? Because everything we do and don't do impacts us. Because think about it, we're all atoms. This is the physics side, because I studied that too. We're all made up of atoms. The chair I'm sitting in is made up of atoms, the chair you're sitting in, the table, if you're at a table, all of these. So I'm leaning on my table, and my posterior is sitting on the chair, on a pillow on the chair. My physical body is changing atoms, exchanging atoms with the table, where its atoms is becoming part of me, my atoms are becoming part of it. And when that happens, when those atoms change places, they vibrate at the frequency of what they're attaching to. And this is happening all around us. We know with quantum physics, there is no time, there is no space where communication won't happen, which basically means communication is happening even though we're not aware, right? Which means we are all connected. Not just everyone on this planet and everything of this planet, but the entire universe. All of the universes. We don't even know how much there is because our minds cannot conceive of that. But we are all connected. So it goes back to every choice you make, whether it's the choice to do something or not do something, ultimately impacts you because it impacts the environment and you're part of the whole. We all are. Excuse me. So separation, you've got that body, I've got this body, we're on computers. It's an illusion. It's an illusion. I know this for a fact because I've studied numerous what I call energy modalities. Other people call them healing modalities. I could get into a whole long discussion about that, but that's not what this podcast is about.
You know, it's about spirituality and how to live
Yeah.
our lives in better ways through spirituality and knowing how the universe works and who we truly are and how we work and the oneness. So anything that you feel is going to help people to live a better life with less fear and more control of their outcomes, please feel free to share.
Well, less fear. So it reminds me, I'm a geek, just saying, or a nerd, depending what generation you are. Um, and I love the Lord of the Rings. Not the books, too much detail in the books. I get bored quickly, but I love the movies. And in the third movie, Return of the King, for those who don't know, there's a scene where Gandalf, who is a being from another planet, um, is talking with one of the hobbits about the upcoming battle. And they end up talking about death. And the hobbit goes, I just never thought it would end this way. And Gandalf, the wise wizard, says, and I think this kind of sums it all up, death is not the end, it's the beginning of a new journey. So, from a physics perspective, because everyone likes their science if there's any analyticalness to them, energy doesn't die. We're energy, but energy does transform. So the easiest way to perceive that is with water, steam, and ice. It's all the same thing, but different forms. So when that ice cube melts, if ice had consciousness, and we don't know that it doesn't, if it does, it's very different than ours, right? It would probably perceive itself as dying, but literally it's just changing form. And when that water gets heated up and becomes steam, it probably perceives itself as dying, but it isn't. It's just transforming. And the same goes the other way. So that leads me to the second memory of the first NDE. Now, a little bit of background. This was the winter of 1956, February. Planes were propeller planes in those days. My family lived in the valley of West Virginia, and in those days, they cut off this is my joke. They cut off the top of a mountain or blasted it off, paved it, and called it an airport. So landing distance was appropriate for propeller planes, not like the jets we have now. They probably had to create more runway since then. It was the first time my mother had ever flown on a plane. My dad and his father, they owned a furniture manufacturing company, and he was going to. In those days, the furniture market was in Chicago. It has since moved to North Carolina, but in those days it was Chicago. So he and mom were going up to Chicago for a mini vacation because they already had two children on home, and I was on the way, and for the furniture market. So they're flying back from that little working vacay. And again, the milk hop, they have to stop at every, because it's a propeller, they have to stop at every airport. The milk hop, I call them, not every airport, but several on the way back to West Virginia. And mom said that she remembers looking out the window and that there was a lot of snow on the ground. And she's like, remembers thinking, oh, that's a whole lot of snow. Now, the thing to remember is in 1956, yes, they did have seatbelts on airplanes, but they weren't telling women to put pregnant women to put the seatbelt under their belly. So she had it over her belly. She was 4 months pregnant and very pregnant looking and wearing maternity clothes. She kind of looked like she was about 7 to 8 months pregnant. Anyway, so the plane landed, it overshot the runway, and they didn't clean off the runway in those days. And the wheels never caught. So the plane did slow down, but it went to the end of the runway and went off the mountain edge. And it was slow enough that I'm guessing, based on what I was told and what I know of physics, I'm guessing it had slowed down enough that it just kind of skimmed over the edge as opposed to flying out and dropping. Otherwise, they'd all be dead. So it skimmed over the edge, went nose down, and literally was straight up and down. The nose of the plane caught on a ledge 100 yards down. And the mom said they were all hanging from their seatbelts because the plane was like that. They did slowly get everyone out of the plane and up the mountain and into the airport. Everyone was concerned about mom because she was pregnant. She was scared that she was going to lose the baby because she'd had just lost one before me. And one time she told me that she'd had some bleeding within the first couple of days after that accident. And of course, freaked out thinking she was going to lose the baby. Obviously, she didn't. I was studying with a person who's called the mother of rebirthing. Her name's Sandra Ray. Rebirthing is actually a breathing technique that I don't remember which yogic practice it comes from, but these people in the early 60s who were experimenting found out about it and didn't know about the yogic connections because it was in San Francisco and they were all cutting edge in the early 60s, right? The short version is the way that happened is uh, the father of rebirthing, Leonard Orr, was in a sauna. And they have, I don't know if you've ever been to a sauna, but they have instructions: do not turn over that, put it up over that temperature, only stay in X number of minutes. And he's like, F that. So he turns it all the way up and goes in, and he starts spontaneously doing this breathing because it's getting pretty hot, and goes into an altered state where he remembers his birth. Now, he checked it out with his mom later and from, what he experienced, and she confirmed it. So that's what started the whole rebirthing name and movement. They were experimenting, exploring, blah, blah, blah. It is a transformative breathing technique if you are ready for it. And that's true of any situation, whether it's traditional therapy or untraditional therapy. um, you have to be ready for it. You have to be ready for it. So I was participating in becoming a certified rebirther. Now they call it liberation breath work, consciousness breath work. That has to do with a legal thing that happened in Colorado that had nothing to do with rebirthing in terms of the breathing technique, but they used that term, so it just created a mess. So they changed the name. But I was participating in a workshop that was part of my training, learning how to be a facilitator of this type of breathing technique. And we were in Ojo Caliente in New Mexico, which is natural springs. And they have like 4 different mineral springs. And this was like a saline one that I was in. We were doing what's called a wet rebirth, and which I loved. I loved doing water rebirths in those days. And so because I'm very kinesthetic. I'm an empath. I've been since I was a very little girl an empath. I actually have felt other people's pain in my body. So I had to learn a lot of stuff without having anyone to talk to on how to find boundaries that are healthy and workable and doable, and able to open them up at will or close them for my own protection, because I probably would have gone crazy with all that input. But not crazy. I probably would have had a emotional mental breakdown because it was a lot of information until I learned how to. I hate using the word shield. I kind of see it as doors and windows. So I learned how to close those doors and windows so I wouldn't get all that input. All of it self-taught out of necessity. But anyway, always had it. So I didn't like being touched, especially during these type growth experiences. So my partner literally had his hand on my belly button, balancing me. I'm face down in the water with my snorkel and my mask and just kind of hanging there, and my nose clip. And and it felt like his arm was my umbilical cord. So I'm doing the breathing technique, and then all of a sudden, I see like a one part of an egg shaped receptacle that I was in, and I'm like this, curled up in fetal position, and I'm looking at my twin, and I literally see her finger break off and float away in the amniotic fluid. Now, when this was happening, it was a cellular level flashback because I am analytical. I mean, my first master's is in statistics and research, very good in math in those days. Um, there was a part of me that was the adult observer, but I couldn't do anything with my body. I couldn't move it. I couldn't direct it. Nothing. It was under control. It was being controlled by this memory, this cellular memory of something that happened when I was in utero. So I see the tip of the finger float off in the amniotic fluid. And I freak out and I tighten up even tighter in that fetal position. And it's like I grabbed my umbilical cord under my neck and was choking myself. And to this day, I can't stand to have anything up around my neck for even necklaces. I can only wear them for short periods of time before I feel like I'm being choked, which I find an interesting correlation. But as I'm going through this experience, I'm screaming, but I wasn't screaming literally, but it felt like I was screaming literally. I followed, actually, I think what happened is while I'm freaking out here emotionally, I feel someone patting my head, going, "It's okay, mama's here. It's okay, mama's here." And I thought it was one of the leaders who had come over, seeing that I was in distress and was calming me down. In actuality, nobody was there except the guy holding me that I'm struggling against. And he's like, "Help, help, I don't know what to do." Anyway, that calmed me down. I don't know if it was an angelic presence or what. I don't know what that was, but I felt being patted on the head and also that, rubbing bit that we do with babies. Um, and I heard, "It's okay, mommy's here," over and over. So I calmed down. Then I followed my twin into the light. As the adult watching this, not able to participate per se, but watching the memory, all I can say is this was a profound experience. The only way I can describe it is kind of like that infant's language, which isn't really English, but this is the English translation. It was like being enveloped by clouds of pure unconditional love. Pretty nice. Pretty nice.
It does sound like a beautiful experience.
Oh my God. And there was music. I don't know. Oh, I remember. It sounded like people singing, and they were singing repetitive words. So like two or three phrases, and then they'd repeat it, and it would kind of go all over the place. Absolutely exquisitely beautiful. It's like it kissed every cell of my beingness with love. It's the most amazing experience. And I was very happy to stay there. Then this very large, and size is relative because I don't know what size I was, but this being was a lot bigger than me. It was oval, it was radiant light, and there was kind of like a shadow of a humanoid. I don't know what it looked like, it was just a shadow within this huge oval of radiant light. And the being came over and said, "You need to go back." And I'm like, "No, I like it here." He's like, "No, you need to." And it felt like a he. "You need to go back." And I'm like, "No, no, I'm staying. I like it here." And we argued for a bit, and it seemed like he was getting frustrated. Finally, he goes, "You have to go back. Your mother asked for you." And it's like I completely deflated. And I'm like, "Oh, okay. All right, then. I'll go back." And I was sent back into the uterus, in her uterus. Um, that's all I really remember of that, though the experience is profound. I've never, ever been afraid of death. The biggest problem I had with all that, then plus the one that happened when I was 6 and kind of made sense that I was angry at being sent back again. Um, I had a very hard time being on the planet. I had a lot of traumatic experiences as a child. Um, Sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect. And it was hard to perceive it as those things because I was able to see what was behind the expressions and I couldn't judge them because everybody was doing the best they knew how in the physical. Everyone, obviously, some of them didn't know how to do some stuff all that well, but I could see that. I could see all those interactions. So it created a sense of being overly responsible in terms of my physical experience in the world as Sarah. Um, so a lot of my life has been about finding that balance of taking care of myself and taking care of others, serving myself as well. Has to have that balance. So that journey led me through cancer that progressed so fast that in from the moment I started having symptoms to the moment I had my surgery was 4 months, 5 months maybe, 4.5. And it turned out to be a stage 3 cancer, a very aggressive cancer. Now I'm fine because it wasn't my time. And the cancer experience actually led me to change careers. I'm a social worker now. Um, and has helped me grow immensely as a person. Even my marriage, which only lasted 14 years, I got 2 amazing children, young adults now with families of their own. I would like to say that I had a lot to do with it, but the reality is their souls are theirs. Their growth is theirs. Their journey is theirs. All I really did was help them understand how to be kind in this physical world. At least I hope I did. Anyway, um, even that marriage, which was so contentious towards the end when we ended up getting divorced, was about my growth and learning. I presume his as well. Um, I have a propensity, because of the analytical side, to have very strong opinions, which as a young person led me to have judgmentalness. It should be like this, not that, which a lot of that I think is being young. Um, it helped me because of my marriage. I learned how to unconditionally love in this world. But for a long time, I was very angry at being stuck here. And that's literally how I felt about it. I'm stuck here. Yes, I was, doing my good deeds or whatever you want to call it, being myself. But I was very angry and I was very self abusive in a lot of ways because I don't want to be here. Um, and we're not our bodies, so who cares, right? I didn't do drugs because they gave me migraines, so that made it real easy not to go that path. I didn't do alcohol because I became allergic to it. I did do sugar, working on that still, but so it's like I was being protected for myself in a lot of ways. It wasn't until I had the cancer, which was in 2012, so I was in my 50s, um, mid 50s, where I realized this journey is about being the best we can be here, learning and growing. Everything about life leads to that if you allow it and embrace it, which I wasn't and was forced in some ways to learn the lessons anyway. And as soon as I let go and trusted in the process, it's just so much knowledge has come in. It just fills my heart. Now, it doesn't make it any easier to be here. This is a tough place to be. All you gotta do is look around. I remember as a child, I think around 7 or 8 years old, and I'd heard about hell. And I remember looking at the world, and I'd experienced being rejected because of my family's religion. I experienced being rejected because in those days I had hairy arms. So I was teased, bullied a lot, experienced a lot of things. And I just looked around. I'm like, nah, this is hell. And we got to learn how to make the best of it. So this is all kind of correlated with the NDEs, I think.
Mhm.
Um, but also a lot of work that I've done, which I think is because of the NDEs. I like to say, I know a little about a lot about very little, and all of its perspectives. So, how much of it's really accurate anyway? Other than the one thing that always holds true. I've even studied comparative religions. Um, Bottom line is, we're here to learn how to love ourselves and others unconditionally. Period and amen. That's what it's all about. That's what Jesus was here to teach us in the language of that generation. That's what Mother Teresa, with all these people who have been spiritual leaders from different religions, Gandhi, Buddha, they all have the same bottom line message. And are they perfect human beings? I don't think so. I mean, there's a lot, but it's like we're all human. We get to be human because, hello, we are. We can't really change that. So accept being human and be the best human you can be, working your way towards learning how to love unconditionally, which I define as accepting where everybody is in their journey without judgment, without judgment. Then the next step is discerning how involved you want to be, if at all, with those people, because we're all in different places. So, like you shared, I hope it's okay to say this, you can bleep it out if not. You shared earlier that you feel like you found your soul family with this work. I think that's part of what we're here to do. And if a person's not part of your soul family, it's okay. And you don't feel right interacting, it's okay not to. You just accept that's where they are. This is where I am without judgment. It's all about love.
And I think this is a very important message for people who are on the spiritual path, because so often I think we're called to spread truth, and then it ends up, for some, not for everyone, but for some, they'll argue the truth or what they feel is the truth and try to force it on others. But really what's just important is that we put what our truth is out there, and we let it plant seeds of future wisdom and let it go. There's no need to force our point of view on anyone. And I see that a lot on social media like Facebook, trying to force a certain point of view, and that's not how we're going to get our point across. It's just planting that seed. And you and I talked about that earlier. Just planting a seed is enough.
Right, right. Well, that leads to what do they call them? Spiritual transformative experiences. When I was around 14, and we had moved to North Carolina by that time, and I had seen a whole lot in the world on the news of cultures and ethnicities and different religions fighting each other, killing each other in the name of their truth. And to me, I've never been what I would call a religious person, though I was raised in a religion and with those paradigms. I don't practice it now because as a kid, I said I'm a child of God. So to me, any religion that comes from love and teaches, excuse me, love That works for me. So I could go to any church or synagogue or whatever if the people are okay with me being who I am. So, but at this age of around 14, I remember thinking, and part of this was because when I was in elementary school, I think around third grade, my dearest, closest friend was from Syria. Her family had immigrated to this country. And Syria, I believe, around that time was involved in a war, the Six-Day War with Israel. And my family on both sides, though my mother wasn't raised Jewish, because her dad was a pro golfer, and that was his religion. But they were descendants of European Jews. So we did go to Temple Reform Synagogue, and the most Reformed synagogue I've ever seen is more conservative than ours was. Ours was an intellectual. We're going to analyze the Bible and the Torah and all that stuff. Um, but her parents refused to let her see me anymore because I came from a Jewish family. And neither one of us, we're both in tears as she's telling me this. And neither one of us, of course, understood. I think we were around 8-ish. So when I was 14, I was remembering that and seeing all this hate and anger that led to killing each other. Sort of like the Civil War in a way, but it was all over, still is all around the world. I mean, I know a lot of people are really upset with what has happened with Palestine and Israel. I totally get that, and I none of that is kind. None of that is kind. None of that is about love. But that's not the only place that's going through it. It's in pockets in numerous places around the world. So when I'm 14, I'm seeing this because it really hadn't changed that much, sadly. And I'm like, just inside my head, processing it, thinking it through. And I'm like, why do people hate? Because of a difference in religion or a difference in skin tone or hair tone or any superficial, stupid reason. And I was very upset about that. And I probably did say stupid even at 14. So that night I had a dream. Well, that was not unusual. I would often ask what I called deep questions for a kid, and I'd get a dream and answer to the question. So in this dream, another one of those big oval light beams, radiant light with kind of a sort of shadow of a humanoidish figure inside, um, comes to me and says, takes me out into nothingness, a void, and looking at the world. Actually, it was looking at nothingness. I got that mixed up with another dream. That was an answer. Anyway, looking at nothingness. And in the center of the nothingness, a huge sphere was created. And we kind of floated, is what it felt like, moved us closer. And they were around this sphere, multiple platforms. I didn't count them all, there were too many. And on each platform, from the top to the bottom, there were windows because it was a hollow sphere, as it turned out. And the windows were as small as a bullseye and as huge as a triple picture window. And every window had some level of distortion in it, as well as dirt and leaves and stuff like that. Some pretty much obscuring the view, some only in the corners, and every possible variation you can think of. He led me to a platform in front of a large picture window that was mostly undistorted and clear. And he points for me to look through the window. And I go look, and in the very, very center of the hollow sphere is this flame. I remember it looking sort of like the Olympic torch, but without the handle. But here's the thing about information. Information is energy, and it's my consciousness that defines it and makes it take shape based on my level of ability to understand. So that makes it a lie right there, because it's limited by my understanding and my vocabulary. Anyway, so he goes, let's pretend that is the truth. Which of these windows shows you the totality of the truth? And I thought about it. I was pretty smart, or maybe I was a smart ass. I'm not sure. Different perspectives, right? But I thought about it and I'm like, well, none of the windows can show you the totality. He's like, that's right. Every window is somebody's perspective of truth. That applies to religions and spirituality, anything that defines those terms. That applies to life, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what I decided is, I'm going to look through as many windows as I can. And that which is the same through every window is probably the truth, or at least a piece of it, not the totality of it. But if it's consistent, I knew this at 14, if it's consistently the same, probably an accurate piece of the truth. So I understood, because I was asking about hate based on religion. And the answer was because we all look through different windows and we all have to, but this is not totally accurate. There's a propensity for people to want to be accurate and right, instead of understanding this is my perspective, it makes sense to me, but it isn't the whole truth. It's my understanding of how it works. That's why, being a social worker, cognitive behavioral therapies, different types of cognitive behavioral therapies, are so important, because our belief systems, the window we look through, limits or expands our perspective and understanding. So our cognition, there's even been research on that. There's this, I think she's a psychology professor teaching at Ivy League, several different Ivy Leagues. So since, she's got those college students captive to do research, she did research with college students and has duplicated it. And the short version, of at least my memory of it, is she was curious as to how much our belief systems impacted our experience. So she divided the college students into two groups: those who believe that what you're born with in terms of intelligence is all you're going to have. You cannot get smarter than what you're born with. The other group is, no, intelligence is mutable, we can grow it. So that was the first step, is divide them into those two groups. And then she gave them all the same activity, which, to be successful with the activity, there were many steps, and you had to learn at this step before you could get to the next step. So you had to learn. I don't know what the activity was. And what she found is the people who thought intelligence was mutable, could continually grow, did very well on that experiment, on that task. And those who thought, your intelligence does not increase, what you get when you're born is what you got, they didn't do so well. And we know so much more we know very little, but we know so much more about how the brain works, that it makes sense that what we believe limits our experiences, because we have a box and we cannot see outside of that box. So the idea, and that's part of what I think your podcast do, is to expand that box so that you can encompass more love, more flexibility, just more love.
Yeah, more love. Absolutely. And more wisdom, less fear of life.
Well, fear, I'm sure everyone's heard the acronym false evidence appearing real. That's perspective.
Hmm.
So if you have a box that says XYZ is something to be scared of, then you're always going to be scared of it. You expand that box and you go, oh, I just didn't understand what XYZ really was. There's nothing to be afraid of there. Then you're no longer afraid. So the false evidence is based on our perspective.
Hmm.
If we have a limited box through which we understand our world, or window, I prefer the term window, then our experiences are going to be limited to what fits in that box. And unconsciously, it's very, very interesting the studies that have been done on this. Our consciousness, if it if an experience doesn't fit inside our box, we throw it out. It's like, oh, that didn't really happen because it doesn't fit inside our box. But the truth is, if I can use that term loosely, is that our box is limited. Our window is limited. So to me, it makes more sense to expand the window. I tend to look at the world from a more scientific point of view because in my training as a statistician, as a special ed teacher, and eventually as a social worker, plus all the energy techniques I studied through the years, the most effective way to be happy in this world, which is a tough world to be happy in, it isn't to have a lot of money, although that lets you do lots of fun things potentially. Also lets you be of service if you have lots of money, help others. Um, it can be used to hurt and the whole spectrum over to help. That has to do with the window you're looking through in terms of the world. Um, it all boils down to expanding that window and love. There's it's. I remember having a very another experience, personally transformative experience, and it was with Sandra Ray again doing her loving relationships workshop. I went into what's called a spontaneous rebirth, which is my body decided it needed to do this particular breath, and Sara had no control over her body. Like, yeah, I'm gonna be breathing. And so they took me over to the safe area where I could lie down and go through this experience. And my consciousness expanded to encompass a lot. I don't even know how much, but it was very expanded. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, it's so simple. It is so simple. And we make it so complex. It is so simple. And I just wanted to remember what it was that was so simple. So I started repeating it over and over and over, thinking if I repeated it 6 million times, that when I get back fully in my body, I'll remember it. Yeah, no, didn't work that way. But I remember it being very, very simple. We make it complex. So to me, it makes sense, having studied the stories of many people from young to old that have had NDEs or comparable transformative experiences. It really is simple. It's about growing and learning to be unconditionally loving of self and others. That's it.
What is the best way for my viewers to start on that journey if they wanted to become more aware? of their connectedness and their eternal love.
Well, the first step is to love self. We have every human has some level of judgment against themselves. The interesting thing is, no matter how compassionate you are for other people, if you're not also compassionate for yourself, then being compassionate of others is more about trying to be good enough as opposed to just sharing love. If that makes sense. It's a very subtle difference. I'm grateful for all the compassionate people in this world. I wish they would also be compassionate with themselves because that's a more balanced perspective. So the first place is always to start with self and grow that relationship. There's a lot of different ways to do it depending on the window you're looking through. Those who are more religious are very much into those structures. Participate in the parts of your church that are about love, not about judging others, but about loving others. Not about sharing your perspective unless you're called to share it. There's nothing wrong, but no trying, as you were saying, no trying to force people to your point of view, but just share what's working for you. For me, it was studying a lot of different energy paths. I'm a full Mesa carrier, which basically means I was trained to do energy work in the shamanic structure of things. Um, I'm a Reiki master, which is another energy technique. Um, I have studied so many to rebirther, although I guess we call it liberation breath work now. Um, Social work, which is another technique with a different structure. Um, the readings I do, the things I've studied. I don't do predictive because predictive to me is a waste of time because there's only right now. Anything that's prediction is a probabilities game. It's gambling. So I can look into the future and say, okay, you've got a 98% probability of XYZ. That can change just by your knowing it. It can change that probability. So I don't go there because it is about staying in the moment, staying present. Yeah, you could plan for down the line. That's appropriate, especially in a world that operates on a financial structure. But that's different than staying present in the moment. That's okay. It's not about being in the future. It's about planning right now for the future. But you can't cope with anything if you're in the past or worrying about the future. You can only deal with right now. Um, your experience with your husband. I bet there was at least 2 or 3 years there where it took everything in you just to do your next step. That's about staying present in the moment. And I'm guessing you didn't really have the bandwidth to do anything more than that.
Not much more, no.
Much more effective that way, though. Much more effective because that's how you get through the marshes of life is by looking for where you're going to place your next step. And when you make that step, the next one, and etc., till you get through. So understanding that fear is an illusion. Physical pain is not an illusion, but it is because it's not real in the big picture. It's just real to us because we think physicality is real. But remember, you're just a bunch of atoms that have been trained to perceive the world through a specific window. Oh, if somebody hits me, it's going to hurt. I remember, Here's an interesting thought that just came up. Um, a story about a well-known man in the more mystical side of things and his wife, Nassim Harriman, who's into physics and quantum physics. And his wife had a baby. And they did, I believe, a water birth, hot tub, whatever. I wasn't there. I don't know them. I just remember reading about it. So most of us have been trained that having a baby hurts. They did their research and they discovered that the breathing techniques for having a baby, the physical experiences of having a baby are almost exactly the same as the breathing and the physical experience of having a climax, which is much more pleasurable, I think, for most people. So they did their practice. She changed her mindset. And to her, she said, having that baby was not painful. It was very pleasurable because she changed the way she looked at it. She did her research, convinced herself that, oh, this can also be pleasurable. It doesn't have to be painful. Changed the way she thought about it and had the more positive experience.
One of my favorite quotes is Wayne Dyer, and he says, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
That's right.
And that was so impactful on me and has helped me in so many situations in my life. And it's absolutely true. And that was your example was exactly proof of that. So it's it's miraculous. It's all about your perspective.
Absolutely. And and a lot of that is explained on my website in process. um, there's a section there I'm developing. Because I've always been fascinated by the brain since I'm 13, 14 years old. I've studied it off and on throughout the years. And now, as a social worker, of course, I've studied it a lot. And as a teacher, I studied it. So our perceptions do make a difference. Um, the website, one section of it is brain development, from conception through old age. So it's mostly getting a lot of information off the internet and annotating it to a couple of paragraphs so it's easily understandable. And I break it down into what seems logical to me. Here's the first trimester of pregnancy, and here's what happens. Here's the when it related to the brain. Second trimester, and each in that section, it's each of the months, and third trimester, each of the months, and then I'm going through 1 year, developmental stages. I think it's very important for every parent, especially, to have this information. The fact that, I mean, we all go, oh, let me find something. Ah, Kleenex box. This looks like purple flowers on a green and black, green leaves and a kind of a dark green background. It might look black. We all agree on that. If it's a different language, we use different words, but it still boils down to the same thing. Well, where did we learn that that was purple and that was purple and that was pink and that's olive and that, etc.? Where do we learn that? When we're very little, hopefully, our parents and other teachers teach us those colors. We think it's truth, but actually it's just agreed upon paradigm. That's all it is. So this is what we start off with from birth on, where we think it's truth, but it's just mass agreement, which is good because it makes communication easier. It's not a bad thing. It makes communication easier. If we're all part of the same choral group and I'm leading it and I'm going, all right, girls, go get long black skirts and red tops, preferably a blouse that buttons down and has the pointed collar. Very specific. Bet you most of the girls are going to look essentially the same because of that description. So it helps with communication. But is it truth? Only here to us because we've all agreed on that.
You've put together, well, you mentioned your website.
Yeah.
You put together some resources for some people to enhance their spiritual journey and their growth. If
Yeah.
my viewers wanted to reach out to you, if they had more questions or needed more information, how would they find you?
The simplest way is to go to the website. It does have a contact uh, part of the website. I don't understand how it worked. I learned programming back in the 70s. Changed a lot since then. I don't want to study that much. So there is a at the when you look at the screen, top right hand side, it has home, explore. That's where the information that's in development for the brain. Eventually, I will have 3 membership areas where one, and I don't know how it's going to play out, but I'm thinking one's going to basically be like $1 a month, and it's going to give you access to workshops that I'm creating or have created. Those will probably be sold on Teachable, but there'll be some free information there as well as YouTube. But it'll be easier just to find it on my website, right? Um, there's also going to be a services area. I do readings. I am working full time, so I don't have a lot of space to do readings for people. So if this, but they're also kind of expensive because I don't do just reading and that's it. Purpose of the reading is to understand the energies that are feeding a problem, what you perceive as a problem, a situation that keeps you stuck. So there's like 8 to 10 hours of my time that I put into that, which includes a 1 month follow up, because there will be things that a person needs to do to help expand their perspective. I can't do anything for anyone else. I can only share information. If it was with you, which I did share information before we started, it's in your wheelhouse now. You're the one who has to take that information and decide what, if anything, you're going to do with it. I can't do it for you. But the readings are seeing the energies. I can see how things are connected. Um, I don't like to use the term past lives because time is a concept our brains need to be able to understand how the world moves. Um, I know Casey and others talk about past lives. I'm kind of on the fence. Is it past lives? Is it parallel lives? Quantum physics is like there is no time, it's all simultaneous. So I'm just like, yeah, whatever. I pick up the energies, I make sense of them. Again, anything that's channeled is limited by my window and my vocabulary. Fortunately, I have a really good vocabulary and I've worked most of my life to expand my window, but it's still limited, still limited. Um, So I do those kinds of readings to help facilitate a person's process of getting unstuck. So stuck just means energy has kind of coagulated and can't flow anymore. And so there's going to be beliefs, expectations, perspectives that keep that coagulated. So the purpose of the reading is to facilitate that to um, unclog and flow again, which will require some work on the individual's part, which is why there's a follow up a month later. um, so that I don't even remember what all the services are because I haven't looked at it in over a year. Over a year ago, there were three of us doing a group thing, and life happened. So they went on to do their own thing. So I've kind of been revamping the website to be just mine again. So, um, but yeah, there's that. To answer your question, though, in terms of how do we become more unconditional loving, strengthen the muscle that helps you intuit. Listen to that like you did. Listen to that pull towards or away from something. Listen to that. That's your higher self that isn't limited by the human perspective. Saying, go this way. No, maybe not that way. Um, strengthen that muscle. One of the most effective tools is meditation. I also teach meditation because I've been doing it for over 50 years. The bottom line with meditation, and this will be some of the free information on the website when I get to it. I don't know how long that's going to take because I'm also writing a memoir of these experiences. And I'm also writing a trilogy that I dreamed when I was pregnant with my daughter, who's 34 now. So obviously, it's taken me a while to write it. um, and the trilogy is all about how to heal the schism within us between the feminine and masculine energies, because they're very separate here and they need to be melded for balancing. We all have both. We don't all accept all that aspect. But back to meditation, it really boils down to the breath, which is diaphragmatic breathing. There's all different ways of on the internet how to get back to diaphragmatic breathing. When we're traumatized and we do chest breath, we're actually re-triggering the trauma every time we take a breath. So it's a good idea to relearn. It's how babies do it. Diaphragmatic breathing, also known as belly breath. But it all boils down to the breath. Practice the breath and give yourself those moments in time to be with yourself doing the breathing. Just observe the breath. That'll help you learn who you are in those quiet moments. If you have an active, because a lot of people go, oh, I just can't sit still. Well, practice the breath while you're walking. Or, I mean, think about it. If you've ever worked out, the most effective way is to use the breath. So when you contract, you exhale. When you relax, you inhale. That's using the breath to strengthen the muscles. We need to oxygenate our muscles anyway, right? Um, run, we use the breath. So if you need to move, do it, but use the breath. You don't have to sit still to meditate. Meditation is the breath. And then there's a lot of different ways to focus on whatever. Those create different experiences. But it boils down to, again, very simple, the breath. If you are able to sit still and that mind goes off, just bring it back and focus on the breath. Up goes off. But my friend goes, squirrel. I think that's from Up. I don't remember. One of those cartoons. Just bring the focus back. It doesn't matter how many times you go off, as long as you come back to the breath one more time than when you went off. Super simple.
Very wise words of wisdom as well, because that is, I think, a lot of people's problem is that they feel like they can't focus. And so they're too hard on themselves when they're meditating. Their mind wanders and they say, well, I can't do it. I'm not going to do it. But that's what happens to everybody. Everyone's mind wanders. You just practice. That's why it's
I've
called.
been doing this over 50 years. It still wanders.
Yes, and that's why it's called a meditation practice. We're
Right.
practicing meditating. Always just bring your mind back. Thank
The
you.
other thing I just want to add one more thing. The other thing about that is un, just like exercise, physical exercise, if you maintain it, you are actually building. And when you stop, even for a little while, you've already built up to a certain level. And if you've made it a practice, even if you stop for a couple of months or even a couple of years, when you get back to it, you very quickly, within weeks, get back to where you were. You don't lose that. The same is true for meditation. Meditation builds on itself. So every time you meditate, even if you're distracted a lot, and you just come back, it builds on the last time, which builds on the last time. So it's a progressive process. It isn't a do it, then you lose it. So you got to
Yeah.
start from scratch again.
So we don't have to wait for the timing to be right. If we're
No,
getting ready to go on vacation or whatever, we can start now and we can just pick right back up wherever we left off. We don't have to wait until the stars align. Okay, the
don't
stars are aligned
well, yeah,
tonight.
you're breathing anyway.
Right.
You're breathing anyway.
Right.
People with young children are the ones that I have found have the most challenge because there's that moment when you get like 30 seconds in the bathroom. That's the only time you have to yourself, is the 30 seconds when you go to the bathroom before they realize you've left the room. And they come banging on the door if the door's closed. Are you in there, mom or dad or whomever? Take those 30 seconds and focus on your breath. That's all it takes.
Yeah.
3 or 4 breaths in the morning when you wake up. Before you jump out of bed, hit the snooze. Set your alarm 10 minutes earlier. Hit the snooze, focus on the breath. When you're going to sleep, it's amazing. When you're sitting in the bus, when you're stuck in traffic, you can focus on the breath because you're breathing anyway.
It's just where your attention is.
Yep.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Sarah, for
you.
joining me. You have just been a wealth of wisdom. So pleasurable to speak with you and to learn from you. And thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for reaching out and having me. I feel
I
very
look
honored.
I look forward to when your books come out. Please keep me posted on that. And Um, if anybody wants to reach out to you, I'll post your website in the video description below so they can just click on that and easily find you.
Well, thank you so much. You
Thank
take
you.
care, and I will talk with you whenever next we are supposed to.